Flying while female. Today we'll hear from a woman who was sexually assaulted on an airplane and what she dealt with in the aftermath trying to bring the perpetrator to justice. I'm Malika Bilal.
I'm Dan Ming. Sexual assault during airline travel happens more often than you might think, and there's surprisingly little that you can do about it. That's today on The Stream.
May I have your attention, please? Your checked-in baggage will be available on baggage belt number 1.
You're asking for forgiveness. Why? Because I'm a girl and you have the right to touch me anytime, anywhere you want to. If you ever do it again, याद रहेगा तुम्हें ये episode. I will call the security. I will make sure I make a complaint.
Sorry about it, please.
Why did you do that? What did you think? I will keep quiet.
I made a mistake. Madam. I made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes in life. I made a mistake. It's a big mistake.
You think this is a mistake? You decided the action. I will decide the reaction.
That video went viral in 2015 and raised the question of who exactly is responsible when a person is touched in a non-consensual sexual manner on a flight.
There is no centralized database for complaints or clear protocols governing the skies when it comes to reporting sexual assault. The murkiness around which agency to report incidents do often allows the perpetrator to simply walk off the plane. So here to help us shed some light on this topic, in the U.S. state of Washington, Alison Devaladze is an advocate for victims of in-flight sexual assault. In Gurugram, India, Sanjeev Kapoor is the Chief Strategy and Commercial Officer for Vistara Airlines. In Pennsylvania, Laura Palumbo is Communications Director for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Also in Pennsylvania, Sarah Nelson is International President for the Association of Flight Attendants. Well, welcome everyone to the stream. Alison, you were on a flight from Seattle to Amsterdam in 2016 when something happened. Would you mind sharing what that was?
Sure. So it's a flight I take quite often for work, and it's an overnight flight. It's about 9 hours. 9 hours. And about 3 hours in, the lights go dark, and I was watching my film and dozing off as I awoke to a man's hand between my legs, grabbing my crotch.
Oh my gosh.
It was disturbing and disorienting. I yelled and hit his hand away, and right away he did it again. I hit him again, and as I was trying to get out of the seat and undo my seatbelt, he went to get me, to reach for me. I blocked him, he hit me and grabbed me again. So I jumped from my seat and ran to the back of the plane, having a bit of a panic attack, unable to explain right away what had happened. But what became apparent to me in the time that followed was that while the crew had the best intentions, it became apparent that they didn't have the tools or the training to know exactly what to do in this situation. They began by asking me what to do, and made comments, I believe made comments to make me feel better, but they also shed light on what a problem this is. And one by saying something similar had happened to her before, you just have to let it roll off your back. And another flight attendant saying she was so sorry about what had happened, but what really was awful was when it happened to the children, because they are often too scared to say something.
Wow.
So those two comments really struck a chord with me. I was able to be reseated in a seat that I would say was not as comfortable as the one I had. And then I was told that the crew would be filing a report and interviewing people. Because it's a dark flight and most people are trying to sleep, no one saw anything. The lights were out, most people were watching movies or had their eye covers on. So no one saw anything, and it turns out that the other passenger had changed seats. So he walked off the plane, and there's no record of who he was. I was under the impression that they were filing a report, but none of this information seems to have been captured. Also, upon approaching Amsterdam, I was asked to return to my seat next to him.
Oh my gosh,
which
wow.
was extremely shocking. I refused, and then another passenger was given miles to take my seat. And I understand that the crew was doing their best. However, there are several, I think, lapses in the scenario.
Right.
And
right.
I believe what it sheds light on is the fact that they have not been given the tools to handle the situation.
All right, so Allison, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. First of all, you raised some points about the flight environment that makes this particularly challenging. Laura, I'd want to pose this tweet to you. Take a look. We got this tweet from My Adventure Bucket. She wrote, anytime you speak up, you risk escalating the issue by angering the harasser. If no one has moved, you're stuck for the rest of the flight. So Laura, you work with this National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Can you talk about what is specific to flying that makes it harder to deal with sexual assault in flying?
Sure. So, flights, like many forms of transportation, can be very public spaces where someone is still vulnerable to sexual harassment and sexual assault. On flights, we have many situations which, similar to what Allison has described, where you have an overnight flight, you may be taking a red eye, there may not be, there's a flight is confined space, it may not be well lit. And people oftentimes are sleeping during a flight, may take a sleep aid or consume alcohol. And all of those things can be factors that someone who intends to cause harm actually uses as a tool to abuse. And in response to the tweet that someone has made about just how much fear there is in confronting the action, this is very much something that we hear oftentimes from survivors of sexual assault, whether or not it happened on a plane. You have this initial experience of trauma, the difficulty of processing and coming to understand what you're experiencing, and then are hit by the wave of uncertainty about what to do, fear about how to respond, whether or not this might escalate into to more extreme violence, and that those are all challenges that often silence victims.
Right. And Sarah, I can see you nodding there. I know that you conducted a survey with members of your union, the flight attendants union that you're part of. What came back after that survey? Were you surprised by the results? What were flight attendants telling you?
So we can relate to a lot of what Laura's saying, and I want to get back to the conditions in the cabin, but we knew that we needed to get a handle around how flight attendants are responding to this, if they're seeing it, how they're responding. And so we had a very simple survey that we put out to our members. And we had 2,000 respondents. 1 out of 5 of those flight attendants said that they have experienced an incident of sexual assault on the plane. And on passenger
Personally? Oh, I see. Okay. Because this is also, of course, something that can happen to flight attendants themselves.
Well, it does happen to flight attendants themselves, but this is specific about passenger to passenger. So, and how to respond to that and manage the situation. So the most common response of the flight attendants was that they separated the individuals physically, and that law enforcement only met the flight less than half of the time that these incidents took place. They also said that they had no knowledge of written guidance from the airlines or training on how to handle this. So some of the airlines I do know have some guidance in the manuals, but there is not a focus on this. There's not an identification of this as a unique crime, as Laura was describing, where the victims respond, and Allison, quite frankly, was explaining as well, that there is a lot of confusion when this is happening. And I want to talk for just a moment about the cabin environment. You know, we have seats that are closer together than ever before, packed in closer together than ever before, with full airplanes. And you would think with more people around, there's less likelihood of a crime being committed. But in fact, we believe that this is giving rise to some of the perpetrators who are seeing that people are not paying attention. They're staying in their own little space. You may have a row of 3 seats where everyone is packed in there together, and the person on the aisle has those eye shades on or is just trying to stay focused on their movie. And the aggressor may be in that middle seat leaning into the person at the window who now is scared to respond, as the person who was tweeting is saying, because they're right over them. And they're looking around for help, and they see that no one is looking.
No
at the same time, we have
not to mention, it probably takes takes a few moments just for you to recognize what's happening. Is that person just simply trying to look out the window? Are they doing this on purpose? Do they know they're invading my space? So I get what you're saying there, but I'm glad that you brought up seats in that environment, because there's a few airlines, specifically in India, who are trying to do something about just that. Take a look at these headlines on my laptop. This is from January of this year. Air India to launch female-only seat sections to combat in-flight sexual assaults. This next one is the airline of one of our guests. This is a Bloomberg article from July. One airline's harassment fix: no middle seats for women. Sanjeev, can you tell us how Vistara's women flyer arrangement service came about?
Sure, thank you. Well, at Vistara, we take the inputs from our customers very seriously. We also try to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers and anticipate their needs and their situations. The no middle seat policy came about just out of courtesy and common sense. I mean, we know that this is a problem that can occur. It occurs all over the world. It occurs in India. And one way to reduce the risk and to make women feel a little more secure, give them more peace of mind, is to not have them sitting between two strange men, squeezed in the middle. So that's how that came about, with just common sense based on what we see happening around us and saying, hey, this is in our control. We can do something about this aspect of it. So the rest of, sorry?
No, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, so the rest of Vistara Women Flyer was in response to specific feedback from our customers, female customers who told us that, look, we sometimes go to new cities for the first time, or we arrive late at night, and would be nice if we had some assistance with local transportation, if someone knew which taxi we're taking, what number, what the cab number is, etc. So we put together a program where, upon arrival, single women, and frankly anyone who wants that assistance, can approach our staff who stand with placards, and they get assisted all the way to the cab, and we make sure we know which cab they've got into and that they're trackable.
So Sanjeev, there's been a little bit of pushback on the idea that women should have to sit in a different part of the plane. We got this tweet here from Sharon. She said, seat reservation for women only has been discussed by an option by airlines too, but segregation is a lazy way to ensure safety. So Sanjeev, what do you say to that criticism that women shouldn't have to be segregated in order to not be sexually assaulted?
Well, first of all, we're not segregating the women. All we're doing is we're not assigning middle seats to them if they're traveling alone. It's if they want the middle seat, we're not going to stop them. But if they haven't pre-assigned a seat, we make sure they don't get a middle seat. The second thing is that's not the only thing we do. Our crew are trained to respond to situations on board. They separate the parties involved. That's the first step they take. They take witness statements. They inform the captain, who radios ahead. Law enforcement meets the flight. So there are many things we do, which you would expect us to do in case a situation arises. But this policy of not assigning single women or women flying alone the middle seat is just something we think is a result of courtesy and common sense. I don't think it's segregation. It's not meant to be negative in any sense. And the feedback we've got from our customers is very positive.
So I hear that feedback. And Allison, I see you nodding there. What are you thinking?
Well, I want to applaud the airline for recognizing that it's a problem.
Thank you.
think that that's a great step, and I wish some airlines in the U.S. would recognize this as a problem. I would agree that it's not a solution to the whole problem. I think and I'm glad you mentioned that you do provide training. I think also one of the things we lack in the United States is, in addition to the policies and the training, is data collection, because we don't know exactly how big of a problem this is. And if there's going to be any intervention to address it, we need some data to better understand how effective those interventions are. So I think, and also understanding across society that we need to say more openly about what's appropriate and inappropriate. And but I do applaud airlines who are willing to recognize that this is a challenge. Is a problem.
I do too. I think, Allison, I agree with you, and I applaud you too for speaking up on this and for bringing this issue forward, because we have to recognize that this actually is a problem. So when we see that response from flight attendants saying that less than half the time law enforcement is meeting the flight, that may be a break in a chain of several things that are happening in the reporting process that occurs today. So if the cabin crew is not reporting it because they don't understand that this is a unique crime that needs to be reported, then we stop there. If they report it to the flight deck and they don't understand that this needs to be reported, or they're making a judgment call, it stops there again. If you don't have clear procedures, as Sanjeev was describing, to report these issues, it can stop in any chain of event of this communication feed to law enforcement. And that is the first and foremost problem. So we need to identify this as a unique crime. We need to be reporting that out so that we have those statistics to be able to deal with it. Flight attendants need to be given very basic guidance that Allison was talking about earlier about common responses from victims that will help us identify when a crime has actually taken place so that we can help support that victim in reporting it. And we also need to be able to respond to those victims and with general guidance about that support, what is appropriate to be saying to these victims, how you're supposed to be treating them, and maybe what is not appropriate. And we don't have that guidance today. It's really lacking, and I'm grateful for this program that we're bringing this forward. I also just want to note that flight attendant staffing is at a minimum, so while the line of sight for passengers is very low, there's fewer flight attendants in the cabin who are able to just watch and make sure that all of our passengers are safe. So one of the things that the airlines can do, in addition to the reporting and the basic guidance and training, is also to increase flight attendant staffing so that aviation's first responders can be identifying these issues and dealing with it.
So, Sarah, I love that you have guidance for the airlines. Unfortunately, they are not part of this program, but that is not due to the lack of effort on our part. Now, we reached out to several U.S. airlines, and while they declined to send a representative for the show, they did send us statements regarding their policies. Now, American Airlines, in specific, began their statement saying, "You will have to speak to the FBI. That is not up to American to determine. That is up to law enforcement." Now, only one airline actually used the phrase sexual assault in its response, and that's Hawaiian. As part of our standard protocol, they write, for flights involving reported allegations of any physical abuse, including sexual assault, local law enforcement officers are called ahead to meet the plane. Now, you can check out the full responses on our Twitter page. We'll be tweeting them out throughout this show, so you can see the vague statements. There's not a lot of specifics there. But Laura, I mean, what do you make of how far airlines are actually willing to take this responsibility?
So what we see with Air India and Visitara and these new initiatives of creating female-only spaces for passengers is very similar to what many of countries have done with subway cars and buses and made them women-only spaces in a way as an attempt to reduce the likelihood of harassment and assault. And although that does address some environmental factors, it's as Allison and Sarah have suggested, it's not a complete solution. We have to understand the fact that sexual harassment and assault, that there's so little data on the issue and such little consistency in the tracking that we don't really have an understanding of the scope of men and boys and gender nonconforming people who experience this type of harassment and assault, as well as the fact that a 2014 survey of flight attendants and crew suggested nearly a third were experiencing sexual harassment in their role. And so although this does give some consideration to the needs of passengers, I think that there is still a lot more to be done in terms of policies and practices to really promote a safe environment on all flights.
So we're hearing about the pressures that are increasingly on passengers, on cabin crew. Allison, I want to read you this tweet. We got this from Amr. He says, aviation authorities at national and international level should draw up sanctions and fines for airlines who refuse to respond to accusations. Allison, do you think that the airlines need to have more pressure put on them from the public and from above, from the authorities?
Well, two things I'd say there. One, instead of maybe, there could be a rating system where airlines get a rating for being, having a zero tolerance policy for sexual assault on planes, and maybe they get some sort of a gold star for that. I think that it does take policy reform, and I've been working with Senators Murray and Casey on trying to advance some policy changes in Congress, and those are in a couple bills right now that will be back on the floor this fall. So I think because the airlines, and when I have brought this up with airlines, two responses I've heard commonly have been, one, we're not law enforcement, And we do provide training, but we provide training with regard to disruptive passengers. And I think it's important to distinguish the difference between how you respond to a disruptive passenger versus how you respond to a victim of an assault. And I think that there's been a failure to recognize that the difference there.
Yeah.
So I hope that we're able to do that going forward.
I think it's interesting you raise that because I think a lot of this conversation presupposes that flight attendants are going to have to play the role of law enforcement, and that seems unfair. Sanjeev, I'm wondering what you think about that. Is that something that should be on the onus on flight attendants?
Well, flight attendants are primarily there for the safety, and it's not just safety of the aircraft aerodynamically, but also safety of the customers. And sexual harassment is a huge issue. So for us, we certainly take it seriously. Now, at a national level, the government is working on a no-fly list for the first time in India. And I think in that list, we expect that people who are found guilty of sexual harassment on board will be put on that list. So there are attempts now being made to actually take stern action against such things.
Sarah, I see you smiling.
I think it's a little bit misguided to say that we're not law enforcement, so we can't take on this issue. The reality is that these crimes are happening in planes that are in flight that take several hours to get on the ground, and there has to be a plan for dealing with the crime from the time that it takes place to the time that you get on the ground and get it in the hands of law enforcement. Also, a unique issue on board the plane is that there is no law enforcement on board. We cannot call for help while we are in the middle of the air, and so you have to be able to recognize that there is a unique crime so that we can report that and get it in the hands of law enforcement. Give them the time to respond and come to the plane, but in the meantime, give the flight attendants the guidance in how to handle the victim and the perpetrator until we get on the ground.
So we're getting ideas from people about how to be proactive as well to prevent it from happening in the first place. We got this tweet from Nosa, and I'll pose it to you, Sanjeev. She said, flight safety briefs should also include a warning that harassment and assault won't be tolerated and give reporting steps. So Sanjeev, is this something your airline would consider as part of the introduction to the flight, the video that plays?
Fortunately, we haven't come across too many incidents where we think that making an announcement is required. However, we do deal very, very strongly when it does happen. The media gets all over it, as you saw from the clips you showed at the start. So I think people are aware, and if they still indulge in such behavior, we take it seriously. We report it. Law enforcement meets the aircraft. We separate the customers. So I don't think we're at the stage now where we want to make flying seem like, a list of thou shalt not do this and that. I mean, we expect people to have some common sense. But, we'll see if at some point.
All right, Laura, I'll give you the last word before we have to wrap up. Go ahead.
There's a lot of safety interventions that passengers experience on a plane that, you could argue it's common sense to put on your seatbelt when you're on a plane. And so I think that all of the information sharing that happens, whether through the pre-flight video or in the safety cards that are with passengers, they can just provide additional information in this area. It's not something that it's already something that airlines are doing. It's already information that they provide their passengers about how to be safe in all of these other ways on their flight. It's just one extra step that's very worth taking, seeing how significant of an issue this is on flights.
Allison, I know you want to jump in. We have 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. I think if we tell passengers not to tamper with the smoke detectors, it's now time to also tell them not to tamper with the other passengers.
I like it. Wise words. And actually, I pulled up here on my laptop your Facebook page, Protect Airlines Passengers from Sexual Assault. This is where people who are victims of this really can go to and find others in the similar situation and get support. Thank you for that.
All right, that's all the time we have for now. As always, you can follow the story online with the hashtag AJStream. But first, here's a peek at what this stream will be covering next week.
In August, we marked the 70th anniversary of the 1947 partition of India with a full week of special shows on the stream. And we want to feature your stories. If you have a family member with experiences from partition, we want to hear from you. Share your family story with us by uploading a short video to our website at stream.aljazeera.com/join, or tweet us your family photos using the hashtag partition@70. We'll feature them in our coverage. And join us for our week of shows. The theme of our coverage, Living Partition, starting on August 14th. See you then.